Hello, I'm Stuart Preston, and this is the Stoned Ape Reports, where I have conversations with those who have changed their lives with the power of psychedelics. Please note, if you are considering working with psychedelics, stay legal and stay safe. Do your research, understand contraindications, test all substances. Psychedelics are not for everybody. Quick announcement, I now have a book out titled The Grief Trip, How I Learned to Heal with Grief and Psychedelics. You can find it at thegrieftrip.com. 100% of proceeds go to the Ian Preston Memorial Fund to help support mental health and suicide prevention. Okay, in this episode, I had the real honor of speaking with the founders of the Decriminalize nature movement going across America, Carlos Plazola and Larry Norris. Each of them shared their personal Stoned Ape story, as well as updating us on what's going on with Decriminalize nature. I highly recommend getting involved. Check the links in the text to find your local group. So please enjoy this conversation with Carlos and Larry. Welcome to the Stoned Ape Reports. Carlos and Larry, really honored to have you guys here. You know, we've gone back and forth, involved. I've been lucky to be involved in your decrim movement that you guys have created. And so I'm honored to have you guys both here, and I'm looking forward to kind of hearing your Stoned Ape stories and what the medicines mean to each of you individually. So first of all, thank you for being here, and welcome to Stoned Ape Reports.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here, Stuart.
Awesome. Well, Carlos, we'll start with you. So maybe you can share with us your Stoned Ape story, like what was going on in your life before psychedelics that maybe needed to be changed or maybe made better or improved or whatever it is that brought you to the plant medicines, and then maybe tell us a little bit about that experience and how things are different today.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Happy to. So, often people wonder why I would be involved in this movement after just one very powerful mushroom journey in October of 2018. And then immediately seeking out folks like Larry and others to say, these have to be decriminalized. It wasn't just, it's 5-gram journey is very powerful, but it was everything that preceded that really is what it was mind-blowing and made it so powerful of a journey. I've had a number since, but really that was the transformative one, the awakening one, if you will. And it was pretty much 30 years of efforts of trying to heal. My story is that I am the son of a Mexican indigenous man who dropped out of school in 3rd grade to support his mother, who was very impoverished. Came to the United States, very young age, to work, and met my mother here in the U.S. And then quickly moved back to Mexico. My parents divorced at a young age when I was young, and then so mom tried to raise us by herself in an urban environment in East San Jose, and it was a tough community, tough way to grow up, and filled with a lot of aggression and violence in community and household. Mom did her best; she was a beautiful human, but it's tough to keep those things away from young people. So I grew up sort of with this deeper understanding that there's something beyond just my own individual human experience, particularly surrounded by aggression, and always sought to try to understand the human story. And so in that way, I went to UCLA. I studied biology. This is after a lot of work as a young person. Studied biology, went to Yale, studied, I got a master's in environmental science. And all of this was because I always had this very deep connection to nature and humanity and life, really. I lived with the Ashwad for 3 months around the same time. They are an indigenous group out of the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador. And I lived with them with the intention of trying to sort of wake up this part of myself that really understood there was something deeper in the world. But just had a very difficult time getting past the trauma, which I now understand to be the default mode network, as it's termed by some, which is this sort of thinking within this deep groove of feeling threatened by the world. And so your response for people who grow up in violence and aggression is always to see everything as an affront or aggressive acts towards the individual, always having to protect against external threats to the self. And I wanted to get past this. So I lived my life trying that. I ran a lot. I did a lot of exercise. Yoga, meditation. But it wasn't until my mother died in 2013, and then I lost some family members soon thereafter, very close family members, that I went into this deep sort of nihilistic state. of believing that life has no meaning. And that's where I found myself sort of in 2018, where I could be surrounded by people whom were very close to me, my children, my wife, and I just felt absolutely nothing. And so life meant nothing. And I just wanted to get out of that and finally heal from trauma that I carried my whole life. So I heard about mushrooms, and I went into this very kind of deep 5-gram journey by myself. I had my cousin watch the door, close the door behind me, and it was just my effort of trying to find hope in the world and beauty again. And sure enough, I was in that journey. I felt a deep connection to spirit. It helped me unpack my addiction to fear. And this is something that I think people who grow up surrounded by trauma and violence don't understand, is that they oftentimes will feel that addiction to fear as something that they're so used to that they create situations of fear and anxiety because it's what they're comfortable with. And so I learned that, I met spirit. And then from there, I started working with folks. I realized that these should not be criminalized. People need to heal from them. Went out, sought community, met Larry, met a bunch of other folks here in the Bay Area, and together we started the journey of Decriminalize.
Awesome. So in that mushroom journey, it sounds like you already had a pretty good connection to nature and kind of a spirit realm. What within the mushroom journey helped with this addiction to fear, this need for fear, and some of the angst around the trauma that you brought out of childhood? Was there anything within that journey or subsequent journeys that kind of helped you identify some of this stuff or understand it or eradicate it? Anything in there that helped you with that?
Yeah, my connection to nature was always there. Since a young boy, I started gardening at 12 years old. My father was a farmer, so in Mexico, a small farmer, what's known as an ejidatario. I would go out and farm with him. So the connection to nature was there. It was spirit that was missing. And my mother would say, you need to believe in God. And I said, well, God, if God exists, they made me rational. So until I meet him, I won't believe. And so in that journey, I met my own experience with God. I saw the infinite in fractal form, and connected with, what my own purpose of living is, which is to be creative and to live from a place of love. And from there comes the meaning of being alive, is that expression of love and creativity. But the part that helped me understand my fear, or my living from fear, was first the sort of dissolving of the ego, was getting to a place where I can actually understand myself outside of this deep entrenchment in fear and anxiety, and then see myself almost as kind of third person, and understand myself. And of course, now we understand it's this growth of all the neurons across your brain that is instigated by the psilocybin and the serotonin 2A receptor. And as I was coming out of the deep entrenchment of fear and anxiety, I was having a conversation with someone, either the higher self or spirit. But the conversation, I was asking the deepest questions that I have ever had in my life, and they were being answered with such deep profundity and wisdom that it was not my own voice, at least not my own voice in this material realm. And that was probably the biggest thing that convinced me I was talking to something much higher than the self I had experienced my whole life. Was, how do I find joy? And it was, you're addicted to fear, you have to choose love. And from love comes creativity and beauty. And those kinds of answers were just things I'd never considered. I'd never thought I was addicted to fear. So that was the experience.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I never heard that term, addicted to fear, until now. So those are some big lessons. How did you, I'm still kind of a contrarian. So when people throw out things like Jungian shadows and integration, I tend to go, yeah, but you learn these lessons, right? These things that came out of this. Did you have some purposeful way to incorporate it into your life, to integrate it, so to speak, and carry it on? Or was it something that kind of the light went on and then you just kind of grokked it? You kind of understood what was happening, and that in and of itself was helpful. I mean, how did that go forward in your life to help you going forward?
Well, the light went on. It was a holy shit moment. Spirit is real. And I don't know what spirit is, right? So I'm not claiming here's what it is. Because a subsequent journey where I asked that question, like, what is on the other side? I wanted, show me everything. And then that was about an 8-gram mushroom journey. And the answer was, oh, you think you want to know everything? And there was a massive download of information, so massive that I realized my small, feeble, material human brain can't conceptualize the infinite. And so that's where I just recognized and accepted the great mystery. There's so much about what's beyond this world that we simply can't know. And it's acceptance of that was my final sort of path towards healing, was that sort of material scientific side of myself wanted to know everything that there is to know. So before I die, I've figured it all out. And then it's just acceptance that there's something greater than the self, at least in this material realm. And that was the final healing part for me.
I get it, man. I have a very, very similar experience of being a rational minded person and wanting to know things in a scientific way. So, and experiencing things that were not in that realm. So I totally get it. Thank you. All right, Larry. So welcome to the show. Larry, thank you for doing this. Good to see you again. Yeah. So what's your story? Like, what was going on in your life that needed fixing, or just to get better? It doesn't have to be a problem to fix. It could be something you just needed to improve, but whatever it was, what's going on in your life? And then how did you end up, with the medicines, and how did things get better?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, this conversation that's already kind of been opened up here is a good lead into what the experience that I can share. And also kind of in the spirit of the podcast title, which is the Stoned Ape, which I think is an interesting thing because that led me to some research that I hadn't been familiar with before. So same with me. I was, always very in tune with nature. I had an uncle who would take me out and we'd, track deer and things like that. So like I was very connected. I was living in Michigan at the time. So that nature was a big part of my life, but I was also seeing everything from the rational mind. That was just kind of, there wasn't really too much conversation about spirit unless it was involved with organized religion and those different types of things. So I went to the University of Michigan. I studied on, it was called biopsychology and cognitive science, and graduated in 98. That was before it was called neuroscience. So basically, looking at the neurons in the brain to see how things react and things like that. So, that was very interesting to me, but I was in this sort of reductionist mechanistic worldview. So that's why it made sense to me. At the same time, I was lucky enough to come across somebody who, her name is amazing for somebody that's introducing you to experiences, and her name was Phoenix. That's appropriate.
Love it.
And she really was like, hey, if you're going to do these experiences, because you see friends that were going out and, partying or doing other things or whatever. And she's like, that's kind of a waste of your time. Like, sit down, close your eyes, go inward and see that inner experience, like explore consciousness. For me at, 19, 20 years old, that was pretty profound because, all of a sudden there was a whole new world that opens up, which is always funny when I hear today people talk about, oh, you should do psychedelics with virtual reality. The psychedelic, they already give you the virtual reality. Just close your eyes. It's there.
That's crazy.
You don't have to do that, right? So
yeah.
So that was kind of interesting to me because now I have this sort of inner experience from my personal experience of mushrooms and looking at consciousness, and then I have this academic experience where I'm looking at consciousness through neuroscience. A complete complete difference, I should say, between those two viewpoints. One says consciousness exists in the brain. The other says we're swimming in consciousness and everything is alive and everything is animate, right? And so that was really interesting to me, and it also helped me reconnect with a bunch of ideas around nature and all that, and actually helped me to set my course straight, because towards the end of that career in my undergrad, I had to do a lot of animal research. And of course, if you're doing mushrooms, and as you said earlier, you became a vegan after some of your experiences, right? If you're doing mushroom experiences and then you wake up in the morning and you basically have to, as far as I was viewing it, torture rats in the morning, is your first thing to do to find, basically, the study was, in my opinion, sorry, Professor Berridge, but in my opinion, it was just to get more grant money. It's like I could have already what the what the results were before we even did the study, but here we are having to do this stuff with rats. So also during the course of this process in my university, I had an evolution class, and the evolution class was the only professor in there that was actually, and this is interesting too, because 94, 98, Michigan wasn't really talking about psychedelic research, psychedelic experiences, all that type of thing, unless it was within this strict neuroscience mode. So So I came into my evolution class, and I was like, hey, I want to do this paper. And he's like, as long as you follow the ideas of evolution, which is like natural selection, a mutation happens that benefits the community, and somehow that's going to help with reproduction and that type of thing, then go for it. Just stick with those. And so I was like, okay, well, that's great. So I started exploring the idea of like, and you'll know this from the Stone Ape title. Is it possible that there was an evolution of human consciousness through accidental ingestion of mushrooms or other psychedelics that existed anywhere in the world? Right? So I started looking at serotonin receptors and sensitivity to serotonin receptors and all the different things. Okay, if somebody has an experience, what does that mean? Okay, well, there's maybe better bonding and sort of personal relationships. Maybe there's an opportunity to hunt better because the eyes are able to see more in the dark and that type of thing. So all these different sort of qualities that would make somebody have benefits for evolution in a sort of strict evolutionary stance. So wrote the paper. It took me a couple times. The professor at first was like, no, you got to keep doing it. So I think there was also sort of stigma around it. And even though he was open to it, he was still kind of giving me a hard time, right? So then I showed that paper to my friend, who was my roommate, and he says, like, have you ever read Terence McKenna?
Yeah, you do, huh?
This reminds me of the stoned ape theory. And so that really opened my mind.
Wow.
Oh, wait a second. There's neuroscience, which I thought there was the only way to study this. And then sort of that really introduced me to this whole philosophical, spiritual, consciousness-oriented approach to looking at psychedelics and entheogens. So that was pretty powerful for me. And then in that process, I kind of utilized that sort of opportunity to really obviously do a lot of healing, as well as everyone's been saying here, but also really open up this idea of like, okay, well, there's much more than what I'm learning in class here. There's much more to this conversation. And, you talked about integration earlier. How do you make meaning of that? That isn't neuroscientific. How do you help somebody with a conversation around this topic that, it's so profound, it's so outside, you have a reductionist worldview, and all of a sudden you have an experience of spirit? That's pretty mind shattering for a lot of people. There's a paradigm shift that has to happen there. And so how do you help people with that idea? How do you help people with those sort of concepts? And so that really started me on my path to where I am today. I actually just was in Ann Arbor this last weekend for EntheoFest, which was a celebration of Mother Earth and her entheogenic plant and fungi gifts. And so here I was speaking on the University of Michigan Diag in a place that 23 years earlier, I wasn't really allowed to talk about this topic. And now here we are. So the shift that happened in that amount of time is pretty amazing. But I think, that's kind of the story that relates to this sort of podcast. But I think over the course of time, through mushrooms, through ayahuasca, through DMT, through other things as well, just the profound sense of being able to reflect on challenges, to be able to go back and heal things that, my friend has this great, he had this great sort of quote, says, but this was in terms of his work with ibogaine, and I haven't actually worked with ibogaine myself, but I think it relates to a lot of other things. It's like, it allowed him to go back to that experience with the emotion volume turned down and reassess everything that was going on without that. That's sort of a good way to put that. You're in it, so this is you're able to take a step back and really kind of review it again, and gives you opportunity to really sort of see things from other people's perspectives, see how I was the asshole a lot of times. Sometimes you think like, oh, this was somebody else doing this, but like, oh wait, maybe I need to reflect on what my participation in this process. So I think that's one thing about these experiences that are pretty profound, is that it just really opens up an opportunity for you to sort of reflect in deeper ways, to connect with this higher wisdom, as Carlos was saying. I also have had this challenge over the course of my life with mushrooms. I was like, oh, this is a higher level of consciousness. With ayahuasca, it's like, this is a wisdom figure that's beyond me. What is now even the concept of plant consciousness? And that's something we are not really allowed to talk about in Western worldview anyway. Do plants have consciousness? Do they interact with us? Is it a dialogue that's happening between us and the plant material and sacred medicines? And so those are the different types of things that I think are in Western culture is really hard to touch on. But if you look at sort of indigenous traditions across the world, this is like the baseline. There's spirit exists. Everything is alive. We're part of this greater continuum. We are nature, all these different types of things. So as we're in this sort of world where we talk about depression and anxiety and PTSD and all these studies, they talk about how this can be helpful for that, but it doesn't really talk about why it could be helpful. And we talk about this a lot, it's because it's with nature and community and sacred and spirit, and just the worldview we're in and embedded in doesn't allow for those conversations. So this reinvigorates that and allows us to really tap into a deeper sense of self in that. So that was sort of my little stoned ape report.
That's good. I like it. It's I don't hear a lot of people say. I hear a lot of people say they first tried it at 19, 20, but they were like, I was at a party and I had a really bad experience, or it woke me up. Or I very rarely ever hear anybody that young actually going having the advice from the Phoenix to to
Yeah, no
do this
joke.
the right way, and that's pretty rare. And just a side comment, consciousness is a big thing for me also. I have another podcast called The Consciousness Podcast. I know, very creative. But there's an episode on there that you might enjoy with Dr. Donald Hoffman, where he talks about what is reality and how is it affected by evolution.
Mm.
So it's very, very interesting. So I guess a caveat I have to throw this out here every time is, I don't recommend anybody does psychedelics. If you do it in a safe environment, in a legal environment. Do all your research around this. Don't just dive into this. So just quick caveat. I put that in the intro too. But that said, you guys have both talked. Carlos, your first experience was a very deep experience. 5 grams. A lot of people will build up to that, but some people I have heard do start that deep. But you went into the home or the room or whatever, closed the door, had your friend on the outside watching the door. What kind of things would you recommend somebody who's listening to this and is dealing with similar things or is on a similar path? What recommendations would you guys have for somebody who's just first looking to do this and try this, and so that they have a good, safe, and possibly profound experience?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd recommend, and I guess the reason it was a good experience for me, is I was ready for it. I'd had a lot of internal conversations about where I needed to go, and I was trusting myself. So I would encourage first is really do the inward conversation. Are you ready for this? What are you ready for? What are you looking to get out of it? Slow down, meditate on the topic, and then find your path. And your path could consist of talking to a bunch of friends who may have had experiences with this, do your research, and familiarize yourself with what it is that you want to do. So the material, the plants that you're going to sit with, and then figure out the best approach for you through talking to people. And then follow your gut and your instinct. I think we undervalue so often in the Western world the individual's ability to heal themselves. Oftentimes, what's lacking isn't the good, wise choices of the individual. It's options of knowing what's available, or knowing what's available as options. And that's really what Decriminalize is trying to undo, is the suppression of information about good options of healing, and allowing the information to emerge in society, as is happening here in Oakland, the first city to decriminalize all entheogens. There's conversations constantly now happening in communities, Black communities, brown communities, immigrant, mainstream communities, in restaurants and bars and parks now about entheogens, and the conversations are ubiquitous, which means that if somebody's looking for information about how to heal, they're going to find the information. If they ask just a few people, they'll find their path to a good source of information. And I often use the analogy of if you're having children and you want to explore who a good midwife is in your area, if you want to be held in ceremony, for example, in looking for a midwife, you do a lot of cross-reference checks. My wife and I had 3 children with midwives. And we came to that conclusion after researching Western medicine. Did it work for giving birth well? It wasn't really all that natural. Midwifery is the oldest institution for delivering children. So we went with midwifery, and then, we did internet searches, but we also, more importantly, relied on word of mouth and finding the good people versus necessarily the charlatans, as you might find in plant medicine. Yeah. That information will rise to the surface. So I recommend just take your time, do your research, and trust your instincts, but sit with your own voice for a while and come to terms with what you're looking for.
Yeah, great advice. Larry, you got any input?
Yeah, so I would say, there's a lot of different layers, like depending upon what you're doing, so something like an ayahuasca experience or any boga experience, I would probably say, make sure that you're sitting with somebody that's, a good facilitator, somebody that knows, what to do, that knows the practices, that knows the techniques, that knows the songs, that knows the soplatas, knows how to cleanse the area or to set up the ceremony or hold space, that different type of thing, because those medicines are much deeper and maybe could utilize a little bit extra support. In terms of mushrooms, one thing that's I mean, there's plenty of studies that show mushrooms are some of the least toxic, and some of the quote unquote, relatively speaking, safer materials you can work with alcohol being like at the very top. And
Right.
people can go out and buy all this alcohol
And die.
that's just part as yeah, that's just part, or you can eat as many poisonous mushrooms as you want. So so the idea of the safety profile for mushrooms is pretty high, relatively speaking. But what I would say with that is, just like Carlos was saying, go through the preparation process. So really kind of prepare yourself what that experience could look like. Kind of do a little bit of research, but not so much that you're inundated or saturated with other people's experiences. And then start small. Start at a lower dose. Understand that a microdose is significantly different than a macrodose. So if you take some microdoses and you think, oh, this is the experience, and then I'll take a little bit more, then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this is not what I expected here. Right?
Yeah.
But for me personally, I think if I speak for myself. For other people on your audience, maybe this is good or not good. But I think, going solo style or going with like another individual, like I said earlier with Phoenix, like we just both sat quietly together. We weren't interacting, we weren't engaging in conversation, because one thing about conversation, this is one thing that is, for me, a little not concerning, but something to just be aware of in terms of the dynamic of the therapeutic dynamic that's happening. Is sometimes there'll be conversation, sometimes there'll be another person there, there'll be things that'll be happening that could influence the experience in a way that may or may not be the direction you're looking for. And so really it's the conversation between you and the mushroom. And this is something that Clint E., who's out of Detroit, talked about a lot. It's just, this conversation is between you and the mushroom. You close your eyes. You don't need anyone else in the room. Maybe somebody there to give you water if you need, or make sure you don't bump your head or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's really just you and the experience. And so to really just go inward, to go deep inward, and to really sort of allow yourself to explore these places, and maybe play a little music, or do a little meditation beforehand. But I think that is really can be really powerful, because you don't have then this external thing that's keeping you out of your experience. I think there's somebody, I forgot who it was, that quoted saying, when you're with a therapist, this is just kind of like the idea of the sort of conversation with the mushrooms itself. When you're with the therapist, there's always an opportunity to edit. When you're with the mushrooms, there's no chance of editing. You're just seeing it straight through. And so it's again, you and that conversation with the mushrooms. And if somebody's outside of that experience and doesn't know what you're going through internally, they might sort of direct things in a different way. And so that's, again, what Carlos was saying, this whole idea of Decrim nature is this self-agency around the healing process, around the sovereignty of your own consciousness. And yes, if you want to have somebody sit with you, that's great, but also know that these experiences are powerful and they're for you, and they're about your relationship to nature and the sacred.
I love it. And I want to get into the Decrim nature here before we finish, but also, Carlos, I want to ask you about peyote. What is it you want to tell us about peyote?
Oh, so we took a position as the organization Decriminalize Nature, which was to decriminalize cultivation of peyote in the United States. And I wanted to speak to the importance of that. Peyote is already decriminalized in a number of European countries, Sweden, UK, Germany. And currently, and the reason I wanted to speak of it is the Wikarika people, which are the longest using peyote culture in the Americas, going back over 5,000 years of continuous cultural development, emergence from peyote use. All their mythologies revolve around peyote as one of the key spirits. And their sacred gardens are being depleted because of extraction, a great amount of consumption in the United States. And also agribusiness and mining is impacting the peyote fields of the Chihuahuan Desert where the Wikarika live. So it is incumbent upon Americans to decriminalize cultivation of peyote so that we can relieve the pressure on the indigenous communities of Mexico from their own natural sources of peyote being depleted. And so this is a conversation that's being had in the United States. Our call is for policymakers around the United States to really try to understand peyote as a spiritual and important cultural resource, as opposed to something that needs to be punitively enforced against. All of our policies currently as the United States is about enforcement against peyote. in one way or another, which is causing the depletion of peyote. And what we're encouraging is to shift towards a more awakened approach of looking at peyote as a cultural resource and spiritual resource, and then having a conversation about how do we prevent it from going extinct in the wild. So cultivation of peyote is key. And we do that with San Pedro, for example, and it grows abundantly. So we have to do it with peyote. And that's just what I wanted to share with your listeners.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. How does that line up with the Native American Church and their councils and committees that are working on this?
Yeah, so there's, and this is a great question. So the Native American Church, think of it as, if you think about the Christian church, there's a number of denominations or groups, factions within the Christian church. And let's just take out the Baptist church is about 3% of the total Christian church denominations. The Native American Church is really a number of independent chapters, as well as two other primary factions or branches. One is Aqaba Native American Church, or ONAC, which is probably represents a third to half of the total Native American churches chapters. And then there's National Council of Native American Church, which is a misnomer, because the National Council of Native American Church is really only 4 churches out of the roughly 400 churches underneath the Native American Church. That particular small group within the Native American Church, otherwise known as NCNAC, or National Council of Native American Church, has taken a position that only indigenous people should engage in ceremony with peyote, and that peyote should remain criminalized for cultivation as well as consumption, only to be cultivated or used by tribal members. And at this point, that simply can't sustain enough peyote growth to prevent extinction in Mexico, particularly in the wild. So we have a situation where a small group that represents only about 1% of the total Native American Church is calling for the policies which will drive extinction in Mexican indigenous lands. Our perspective, my perspective, that comes from a place of trauma, of territoriality. But for the most part, most Native American churches, and I've talked to a number of them, call for the continued cultivation of peyote to prevent extinction in the wild.
One just to add to that too is that I think it's an interesting time frame we're in when we're trying to reduce punitive sort of approaches to plant medicines. That the National Council of Native American Church is actually fighting for people to go to jail for growing a plant. And that's, to me, is, it's hard to sort of conceptualize, really.
That's a tough one to swallow.
Nobody owns a plant. This is something that I've heard indigenous elders speak about for a really long time. That nobody owns a plant, nobody owns the earth, nobody owns particular, sort of approach to spirituality or sacredness. But that they're actually fighting to make sure that people would have to go to jail for growing a peyote plant is something that I'd much rather have spent the last 2 years in this conversation taking seeds of peyote and planting them everywhere with them than getting into a battle about who can cultivate or not cultivate and who should go to jail for cultivation and that type of thing.
And for your listeners, I just want to clarify, the board of Decriminalize Nature is 60% indigenous, and all of whom either come from peyote growing regions or have deep experience with peyote, or both. My own ancestry is from Jalisco, which peyote was broadly used in Jalisco. And so my ancestry comes from that area. So the idea that the conversation, which is happening in California under Senator Scott Wiener's bill, he's restricted the voice of indigenous to only 4 people out of 26 million indigenous people in Mexico and the United States. And so as an indigenous person from Mexico, I have a concern about that, because we have to be expanding voices of those who participate in policy making, not narrowing the voices of those who participate in policy making.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is very interesting. Throwing people in jail for cultivating. The good news is I've not met anybody who can actually grow a peyote plant. So maybe that will help them, because it's not the easiest thing. It's not like a San Pedro. Although I have some people grafting peyote onto San Pedro, and that does seem to help it grow a little bit faster. But who knows what effect it has on it. But thank you guys for sharing that.
Just one little addition to that too, which I think is interesting, is we're seeing a stance now not only just for peyote, but for all cacti containing mescaline. So we just heard recently in Santa Cruz that IPCI, which is basically the National Council of Native American Churches nursery, which is funded by David Bronner, which is run by executive director is part of MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. And they actually went to Santa Cruz and recriminalized, after they decriminalized all plants and mushrooms, they recriminalized all cacti containing mescaline. So the San Pedro.
Really?
So if you go to a Home Depot to buy your San Pedro, that's illegal now. If you go to a local nursery to buy San Pedro, that's in San Pedro, as Carlos was saying, grows really quickly. And as you were saying, it can be grafted with peyote buttons. And so, I don't really understand that perspective, to take not only just peyote, but now all cacti containing mescaline, to criminalize that. And so that's something we're going to be working on, trying to shift and change in terms of Santa Cruz policy really soon.
All right. Yeah, good. So along those lines, why don't we wrap up here by telling us give us a quick history, all the awesome stuff you guys have done and what you're working on right now and how people can get involved.
Is that me, Carlos? Yeah, okay, right on. So there's lots happening all over the U.S. right now. It's been really beautiful. Obviously, helping out with your wonderful teams in Arizona. Sounds like Tucson's doing some great work, and Phoenix is going to be online soon, and the statewide stuff going on there. I think we have about 40 to 45, maybe a little bit more active teams across the U.S. right now. We've passed decriminalized nature's related policy in about 7 cities now. Obviously Oakland, Santa Cruz, Washington, D.C., they got 76% voter approval. Ann Arbor, Michigan, Washington County, the public policy directive by the district attorney there expanded decriminalization out to the entire county. And then also 3 different cities in Massachusetts since 2021 with the help of another organization called Bay Staters, which include Cambridge, Somerville, and Northampton, Massachusetts. We are helping out with statewide legislation in Michigan. We're helping out with some statewide legislation in Vermont, and we have hopefully 3 cities that will pass something similar to DM policy by the end of this year, including Arcata, California. Grand Rapids, Michigan is looking to support decriminalization of entheogenic plants and fungi. We also have Detroit is coming online with a ballot initiative. And another city in either Hazel Park or East Lansing are also looking pretty close to finishing before the end of this year. Michigan, California, Massachusetts, for whatever reason, seem to be really making a lot happen right now, which is great.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cities throughout the U.S., like Missoula, like Portland, like obviously everything going on in Arizona. There's some places in Vegas and Reno. We have some outreach in Oklahoma, a bunch of places in Texas. Florida, Atlanta, a lot of places. So that's been really exciting. Our sort of job as Decriminature is really to help empower local communities to engage in this practice. So bring policy together. How do you introduce it to city council members? We offer all the templates for free. We do sit-in meetings with the local teams, with the city council members, and those different types of things. So basically everything that they need is available. So it's just basically gather your team together, figure out your city council process, and start the process of introducing yourselves. And we found that it's been really successful. I think we have 53 or 52 yes votes and 1 no vote over all the different city councils across the U.S. right now.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive in terms of educational process that we're engaging in. And then, I tell a lot of people, I've been amazed at how many city council members have been not only like basically saying, you don't have to convince me of the benefits of these plants. I have a family member that's just healed on this, or I know some of the research, or maybe I've had an experience as a youngster, or maybe, like the sponsor of the resolution in Oakland, California, the one who really led the way is Councilmember Nolgallo. And he comes from the Yakwe tradition. His grandmother was a curandera. And so he was very familiar with plant practices and healing potentials of plant medicines. And so a lot of times I just say there's probably city council members that are just waiting to be asked because they can't present it themselves. But if you get a bunch of constituents together and come in and say, hey, this is something really important, then they can move forward and have that opportunity to shift policy and that type of thing. So if you want to get involved, you go ahead and you can access our website at decriminalizenature.org. Or you can go on our Facebook or Instagram. We do a lot of informational messaging on Instagram. That's at Decriminalize Nature. Or reach out to us, decrimnature@gmail.com or decrimnature@protonmail.com. Also, if you happen to want to donate, we're always looking for some fundraising as well. So PayPal, or we also are doing BitPay now. So reach out to us in terms of that. But it's a really easy process. We give you a big organizer's handbook that has really all the information you need in there. And then we sort of help you out the whole way. And I think at the end of the day, this is really important because for me, at least, and Carlos can maybe speak to, he's a little bit more knowledgeable and experienced in this world. But for me, it was totally foreign. Like I had no concept of how to even approach a city council, how to make shifts, how to make changes, how to engage in this process. And I was disillusioned with the process. Government doesn't work for us, that type of thing. Yeah. And really realizing like, oh, wait a second, like come in, start talking to the city council members as their community members, as their people who also want to see healing in their community. And really just start that process. And it's been really amazing to see it move forward. And I think this extra layer, it's not only just decriminalizing entheogenic plants and fungi, but now we're giving tools for people to make change on the local level. And now anything they want to change about, they know how to gather a community, they know how to present it, they know how to do a resolution. And so all those different types of things are really important in terms of the overall approach of decriminalized nature.
And you guys are very supportive. You will show up when you can, when your calendar allows. So it's not just you've put out the entire game plan for people, but they can also come to you for resources to help get their things organized. And you guys have been extremely generous with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, right on. And I just wanted to build on a little bit what Larry said there. A key thing that happened in the United States and I think globally was a key milestone in the emergence of corporations as the sort of managing driving forces in American politics was Citizens United, deeming corporations as humans and to be equal to humans. And what that really does is at the federal level, the power of corporations is immense. At the state level, it is also very much very strong, but less so than the federal level. At the local level is still where citizens have a direct connection to their elected officials and the power still resides in the voting population. There's less of a tendency for corporations to buy off city council members. So that's still where we retain much of our power to influence change. And I want to put that out there because the way we've approached our council members is as human beings. All humans want to love. All humans want to feel joy. And we've experienced love with family members or others. And so when we speak to council members, we speak to their hearts and their minds. We lead with the science, and then we give testimony that speaks to the importance of this for healing people. And that usually hits them in the heart, if you will, and opens them up. And then we shift to the ancestry and the fact that their ancestors and our ancestors all use these plants to heal. And that's the way that we've been able to achieve such a high success rate of getting yes votes at council. And so this works with all people, whether they're at the city, state, or federal. It just takes a little bit more work at the state because you're fighting against a lot of investment of corporations into the political machinery by way of donations and contributions and lobbyists. So you just have to work harder at the state level. But you'll get there in terms of the yes votes. You just have to do the educational work. In terms of advancing the cause nationally, we really do look at our local cities as sort of incubators of how to advance the cause. Here in Oakland, after we decriminalized entheogens, we then passed a resolution to protect community-based ceremony because it's the least expensive but most effective way to help people heal who have severe trauma, be it veterans, unhoused, people who come from domestic violence. And so we did that in December of 2020. Now on the agenda for Oakland, which we hope will also be a national model, is going local with our economy. Our locals, our artisans, our stewards, our craftspeople who have really taken the time to build a relationship with these plants and listen to the wisdom of the plants are all local. You're not going to find them at the highest levels of corporations. You're going to find them at the lowest levels of community. And so this year and next year, we'll be passing legislation here locally that enables local economy to emerge and hopefully sets up barriers to the kind of corporate extractive model that we've seen under Prop 64 here in California to protect our relationship with entheogens.
Nice. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank both of you guys for everything you've done. And thank you for coming here and sharing your personal stories. Truly grateful for all the great work. And, I personally look forward to working with you guys to get some great things done, here in Arizona and watch what you guys do across the country. So thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate it. And looking forward to some Decriminate Arizona passing. So exciting.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.